Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming along to this workshop. So if you were at the public talk yesterday, you would have heard a lot about the hate and misinformation and disinformation that's being spread through social media. And the purpose of the workshop today is to look at a practical thing that you can do about this, which is reporting content to platforms in order to deplatform some of those people who are spreading that hate and misinformation. And we're also going to look a little bit at using some other methods like the Broadcasting Standards Authority and the Advertising Standards Authority in the case of content that is on television or radio or advertising. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit as well about talking with friends or family members who have been impacted by disinformation and so forth, that they've then started believing themselves. So with the public talk yesterday, I put up a link to the presentation so that you could go through and look at some of the information I'd linked to there, or see the books that had been recommended. Today I've got a link here as well for the presentation, or a QR code to scan if you want to have a look on the other device. I'd suggest doing that to bring up the links in the presentation to some of the things that we're going to look at reporting there. But if you're unable to do that while you're watching the workshop, you can bookmark that and go to it later. But I'd suggest giving it a go while we're in the workshop, just to make sure it all works. Right. So there's 4 F's for reporting content: find it, flag it, finish it, and friends. So find it, obviously finding the content, flagging it as doing the report, finish it, making sure the report is all completed, and friends is then encouraging others to report the content. You can skip that step, but it's helpful to have more reports to get these platforms to act. So to report a post on Facebook, in the right corner of each post are these 3 dots. You click on those 3 dots and then you get a menu pop up which has the option find support or report post. It'll give you a list of options and you need to choose the best one. So violence, if the post is making a violent threat against an individual; harassment, if it's targeting an individual for harassment; false information for misinformation; and then hate speech if it's a post targeting a group based on race, gender, religion, and so forth. And there's a few other options there, but those are the main ones we'd be using for this sort of purpose. Looking at the false information example, it then asks you what kind of false information. Health is one that I've been using a lot lately. This is the one to use if there's misinformation about COVID-19 or the COVID-19 vaccine. Politics is for objectively false statements about politics. For example, a fake quote from a politician. It's not for reporting a political statement that you disagree with, but for one that is objectively false. And then social issue is for those more meta-political things like false information about, for example, attributing an arson attack to Black Lives Matter or something like that. Again, when it's objectively false, not just someone expressing an opinion. I'll post that link that I've got there in the chat there as well. Oops. But there it is on the screen there. Right, so if we want to try that with an example here, I'll post this link in the chat too. but it's there. If you've got the presentation open, you can follow that link there, which will take you to a Facebook post. So I'll open that one myself here. So this is a post from a reasonably well-known New Zealand-based conspiracy theorist, and he's claiming that the shot, which he spelt with a 0 there, and it's probably a bit small to see on the screen there, but he's claimed that the shot is one part of a New Zealand digital prison. And the reason he spelled shot with a 0 is that he's referring to the COVID-19 vaccine. He's using the word shot instead of vaccine, and he's spelling it with a number so that any AI detection of misinformation is likely to miss that, because he's deliberately misspelled it, which is why it's important to get these practical reports done. So if we click on the 3 dots, find supporter report post, I'm going to go false information, health, and then submit. It gives you the options here then of blocking the person or hiding all posts from them. If you're looking for misinformation to report, you don't want to do that, because then you won't see it. It's more about, in the case of harassment, you may want to block someone or hide all their posts. But in this sort of case, I wouldn't recommend doing that. And then to finish, done. And then if you want to do that last step, you can copy the address of the post. If it's a post you've seen in your feed rather than one that you've gone to directly, you can click on the date and time that the post was made, and that will give you the full URL of the post, which you can then share, asking people to report. If you do have any questions about that, do post them in the chat, and I can go over anything there. Or otherwise. Now, YouTube has a similar process. Underneath the video, above where you see the comments, you've got the options like share and save, and then you've got these 3 dots that if you click on it will give you a smaller menu with the option there to report the video. You've also got their open transcript, which can actually be quite useful, because YouTube will ask you for a timestamp for the report. And rather than watching through a whole video, you can open transcript and search for keywords in the transcript to find which part of the video has the misinformation. Often with these videos, they don't get reported by the people who are watching them, because the people who are watching them, who may be a sympathetic audience, aren't going to report the video. They're going to accept that misinformation. So there's can be a little bit more work to find misinformation in these videos, but the open transcript means you can search and not have to watch the whole video necessarily. YouTube hasn't actually introduced the option to report content for misinformation. So in situations like this, you can use the option of spam or misleading. If it's misleading content, you can report it for that. They do have, though, harassment or bullying for when an individual is being targeted, and hate or abusive content when it's a group being targeted. They also give you this option here of infringes my rights, which you can use in situations where there's defamatory content or private information being shared. Right, so we can try it with an example here. So again, I'll put this link in the chat there.
Now today.
Question in the chat there: is it possible to report without signing in? I think it is on YouTube. On Facebook, though, you would need to be signed in. Particularly in the case of if you're reporting something for harassment, it'll ask you, is it you being harassed or is it a friend being harassed? And then if it is a friend, it'll get you to search your Facebook friends to find the person being harassed. So it is a limitation there of if it's somebody you don't know, you can't actually report it for harassment. YouTube, though, you can report that. Right, so in this video here, if you're at the talk yesterday, you'd recognize Terry Opines. And this is a video he made back in August where he is stating that there are various politicians masquerading as Maori. So click on the three dots, click on report. We can go here, hateful or abusive content. And I would choose promotes hate or violence. And then next. So it'll ask you for a timestamp here. For this one, I know that it is 11 seconds where he starts talking this, and it gets you to provide some additional details there. So in this example, I would write something like, the man in this video is claiming that numerous Maori politicians and leaders are not actually ethnically Maori, which is a common racist trope. What he does in this video, if you watch through to the end, he shows photographs of various Maori leaders and politicians and comments on their skin tone and eye color, claiming that they're not actually Maori and they're predominantly European. And this is a trope that is used to like erase Maori ethnicity by claiming there's no full or real Maori left. I haven't had a lot of success with this particular kind of racism on YouTube, I think, because the people who are checking these reports aren't necessarily as culturally aware as we might be in Aotearoa about this sort of issue. It's a bit more clear cut when it's some of the more like Islamophobic content, for example, where obviously globally the Muslim population is a lot bigger, and Islamophobia is something that there's a bit more global awareness of than this kind of anti-Maori racism. But still, nonetheless, I would recommend reporting that kind of racism as well. And the more reports there are, the more likely there is that there'll be some action taken there. Actually, one more thing I'll show you on that one is, like I mentioned, the transcript that you can use there. It's probably a bit hard to see on my screen that I'm sharing here, but maybe try this on your device as well. If you go to open transcript, it'll open here on the right hand side of the window a transcript of the video. unless the uploader of the video has put in their own subtitles, it'll just be a automatically generated one, so they're not always terribly accurate. Then what you can do is you can hit Control F or Command F. Someone said doesn't come up. Is this on a computer or on a mobile device that you're using there, Catherine? Computer, okay. So you click on the three dots and you haven't got open transcript? Just a list of, okay. Yeah, I'm not sure why that's not showing up there, but perhaps try it in another browser there, or it may be. Yeah. Anyway, if you can get the transcript there, you can then use Control F or Command F if you're on a Mac to search the transcript. So you can put a keyword in there. It will highlight each time in the video that he says the word Maori, and then you can look at the time and you can find the bit that you want to report. Oh, great! Just popped up now. So when you're doing the last step, the friends, if I'm doing this, I'll often put in the timestamp that people should use and give a bit of an idea of what to write as well. But I'll say to write more in your own words. So that's reporting directly to platforms. We can also use reports to NetSafe, who are an organisation based on keeping people safe online, and that includes safe from harassment and that sort of thing on social media. NetSafe essentially makes reports to the platforms like we've just done, but they are taken a bit more seriously by the platforms. They'll be looked at by an actual human rather than just the algorithm looking at whether it violates the community guidelines. So they're a bit more likely to get action if you use NetSafe. Unfortunately, they're more for harassment of an individual. So you can go to NetSafe if somebody's made a video about you. If it's more of a broad thing like a harassment or inciting hatred towards a group, NetSafe doesn't necessarily have the same ability there. But if you're part of that group, you can go and make a report, and they can work with the platforms there to try and get some resolution on content now. So you can submit a report on their website, which is netsafe.org.nz, or you can email them, or they even have a toll-free phone number you can call to speak to them. You can also report content to CERT-NZ. CERT responds to cybersecurity threats, but they've also been mandated with investigating COVID-19 scams. So you can email things to covid@ops.cert.gov.nz. And this is for online and offline content. So if you're getting flyers in the letterbox with vaccine misinformation, of which there have been several different organisations producing these, you can photograph it and email it to CERT, letting them know where in the country you are and what date you received it, so that they can investigate further. And there's a link there that gives you a bit more information from their website. And of course, there's reporting to police. This is for more extreme cases, such as really credible threats or doxing. That's releasing private information about someone, such as their home address or their workplace, things that could put someone in danger. You can call police on their non-emergency number, which is just 105, or you can do a report on 105.police.gov.nz. So this isn't something that I've used frequently. The one time I have called 105 based on seeing something on social media was the example on Facebook that I mentioned in the talk yesterday, where the owner of the Facebook page had posted a comment, posted a photograph with the comment, if this happens to my daughter, I'm destroying mosque after mosque until they take me out. And then there were a number of other comments supportive of that and supportive of that violence underneath. And this was just a few months after the Christchurch shooting. So I wondered if this was something that police wanted to be aware of, and they were once I called them on their non-emergency number. There's also the Advertising Standards Authority, who have the authority to make decisions about advertisements which include sponsored posts on social media. You can make those complaints online via asa.co.nz. I've given you an example complaint there, and I couldn't actually find this on their website. The link to it went to a different complaint, but this is one that I made about a sponsored post that I saw on Facebook, which had a link to a YouTube video, and the text said that every mosque is a Trojan horse. The idea that a mosque was a Trojan horse for some sort of Islamic invasion of New Zealand. And because the person who had made this post had sponsored it, it then became an advertisement, and it was under the jurisdiction of the Advertising Standards Authority to investigate complaints. One limitation of the ASA is that they do move quite slowly. They did rule that my complaint was valid and that the advertisement should be taken down, but by that time it had been over a week, and it was only running as an ad on Facebook for a week. So practically nothing really happened with that, because the advertising had already happened and any damage had been done. It was more just a moral victory, getting them to rule that it was a breach of advertising standards. But it's something to be aware of there. In this case, it was an individual making the advertisement, but certainly if it's an organization, this could be more significant for them there. So again, probably a bit hard to read there, but there's just an example of that complaint I mentioned there, where they ruled that the advertisement was likely to cause serious offence, taking into account generally prevailing community standards. What the board that investigated the complaint said was the text, every mosque is a Trojan horse, is likely to cause hostility, as it implied Muslim people were dangerous or had bad intentions towards the people of New Zealand. And of course, with that complaint being upheld, there's a precedent there now for any similar advertisements on social media, if you were to complain to the ASA about those. For content that's broadcast on television, not just online, complaints can be made to the Broadcasting Standards Authority. More information is on their website, bsa.govt.nz. The BSA actually has quite a bit of power. They can impose fines on broadcasters. They can prevent them from running advertising for 24 hours. And they can require them to issue corrections in the case of complaints about accuracy. So I was hoping that I'd be able to show you an example of a complaint that I've made to the BSA here today, but they haven't come out with their final ruling yet, and that's likely to happen sometime in November. But I did make a complaint about an episode of Talanoa Sao, which he has on Up Television, where they had as a guest the conspiracy theorist Damien Dement, the man whose Facebook post we reported earlier, and he said a number of mistruths about COVID-19 and the COVID-19 vaccine. So I made a complaint to the BSA that this was a breach of the accuracy standard because the host had not challenged him and it had been misleading to the audience. So I should hear back with their final statement in a few weeks' time, and we'll find out, I guess, what they're going to do, whether they're going to impose a fine, issue a correction, or what else. Can you complain about comments made in response to a YouTube video? Yes. So you can report a comment to the platform. If you mouse over that comment, you get those same 3 dots over on the right that you can then click on and then choose to report, and that'll report it to the platform. You can also report the comment to NetSafe. Like if it's something harassing you, you can get a screenshot of the comment, and also if you click on the time it was made there, you can link a URL directly to the comment and make a complaint to NetSafe. Yeah, comment there from Kay about offensive advertisements being withdrawn after complaints to the ASA. So there's an example there with Libra's advertisement for tampons that was transphobic. So it shows some of the effect you can have just by doing a formal complaint this way. So summarizing here, when it's possible, stopping hate and misinformation at the source is one of the best ways to stop its spread, which is why I advocate for deplatforming hate and misinformation. Many of the deplatformed individuals move to alt tech platforms where they have a much smaller reach than they would on mainstream platforms. So to give an example there, Damien Dement, who is still on Facebook, has been banned from YouTube. He now posts videos on a platform called Rumble, and also uses the encrypted messaging app Telegram. But you're less likely to encounter his content unless you download these different apps or go to these different websites and look for it. Whereas when it's on YouTube or Facebook, it could just be put into your feed there, so that you could find it without looking for it. So even though there are still other platforms that these people can go to, they're going to have a smaller reach, and it's less likely to reach new people. Question there: can anyone complain about the comments made in a Facebook post? Yes. So similar to YouTube, you can report a comment to the platform. If it violates the community standards, they will remove it. And you can also do complaints to reports to NetSafe for comments. Again, if you get a link directly to the comment, which on Facebook you can get if you click on the date and time it was posted, that'll link directly to that comment. And then I would say that deplatforming hate and misinformation is not enough on its own. Kay's noted there that the complaints about the Libra advertisement weren't just to the ASA, but also directly to the company. And there was a lot of public pushback on Facebook and other social media. I think that's important to raise that as well, that it's not just those official channels, but a public pushback, which is particularly effective when it is a company like that who are concerned about and having a negative public image. So since deplatforming hate and misinformation is on its own not enough, I want to talk a bit about talking to friends and family who have gone down the rabbit hole with conspiracy theories or misinformation. A few perspectives I'll share here, and then maybe we can open this up to a bit more group discussion. So can people influenced by conspiracy theories and misinformation be brought around to a new perspective? One viewpoint here An article published in The Guardian in 2015 by Dexter Thomas, headlined, "Don't unfriend your don't unfriend your racist Facebook friends, teach them." So he's advocating that rather than creating a safe space on social media by unfriending anyone who has a racist or a hateful viewpoint, you're best to keep those people in your life. And there's a quote I've put here: "There can be no safe spaces for us until all spaces are safe. If we aren't safe in the courtrooms or in the streets, we can't pretend to be safe online. Real life is not a closet that you can tidy up. It's a world in which the girl you used to eat bugs with in kindergarten can grow up to be a frightened xenophobe." I should probably note there that Dexter Thomas, this is an African-American writer, and I think addressing a predominantly white audience. He's not saying remain friends with people who are racist towards you, but imploring his white audience to not wash their hands of the racism of their friends, but to instead engage with them. So there might be some different viewpoints about that strategy. There's quite a long quote from David Newart's book, Red Pill, Blue Pill, How to Counteract the Conspiracy Theories That Are Killing Us. So if you're at the public talk yesterday, I referenced an earlier book by David Newart, Alt America, The Radical Right in the Age of Trump. This is a more recent book he's done, which is more looking at conspiracy theories. So I'll read this whole quote out. I realize it may be a little hard to read in the font size there. "The narratives that bind people to conspiracy theories are often large-scope mythologies that make them feel heroic as well as part of something bigger. These are normal drives in human beings, but have been twisted by the disinformation to which they've been exposed. These mythologies are also highly personalized and often gut-level in nature. This is why there is no immediate large-scale solutions to the problem, fixable through mass media or other appeals. So there really is no blue pill, as it were, no universally applicable remedy that would cure people of their conspiracy-bred delusions. The only way to actually draw people out of the conspiracist universe and back onto the sometimes murky light of the real world is on a one-to-one basis, one at a time, very slowly, and with an emphasis on empathy, as well as understanding that even the best efforts in these areas often fail." So that's my own emphasis there, the bit that I've put in bold. And Newart notes, "It's a slow, often painful, and sometimes rewarding process. But for people determined to not simply cope with this phenomenon in their lives, but to confront it and overcome it, there is not really any other option." A comment from Kay there that I think is important. "Unfriending or blocking may be needed, though, if you don't have the energy to deal with their hatred. Staying friends with racists or transphobes is a luxury some people can't afford." And I think that's an important perspective as well. Another point here, and this also comes from David Newart's book. He's quoted Professor Newman as the founding director of the International Center for the Study of Radicalization and Political Violence. "It's like quitting smoking. People will tell you that it's not possible to quit smoking unless you really want it, unless you are convinced that you want to change your lifestyle. And I think the same is true with extremists or people who are very deep in these weird theories. Unless they themselves have questions that you can leverage, and unless they themselves are having doubts that you can work with, it's basically not possible." So a bit more of a pessimistic view there about engaging with people who have gone down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories, that there's only a way to bring them out if they have some doubts there, and if they themselves have decided they want to get out of that space. So we'll perhaps open it up there to some group discussion. Catherine has a good comment there. That it's a privilege to be able to do what Kay suggested there, and that you may need to block hateful friends, but people of color can't just block or unfriend the racist system. They don't have that choice, which I think is what the columnist in The Guardian was getting at there. Well, if we're all in the, I'll stop the screen share because that's the end of the slides there, and perhaps we can, rather than just using the chat, we can speak on microphone there if people have comments or questions or discussion points.
Hey Byron, I've got a question.
Mm-hmm.
So I teach a third year course on citizenship, which is a lot of fun. We talk about a lot of this stuff, but thanks very much for that material about telling them. So that's going to be super useful. I just wondered, because a lot of my students are probably not going to report stuff, and I just wondered, so when they see stuff coming through, not from, I like the family and friends stuff. I would encourage them to do exactly what you said there. But should they just ignore it? Obviously, we don't want them to, forward it on. But should they ignore it, or should they try and counter that stuff that they must see constantly coming through those feeds? Should it just be a case of telling them to go, nah, just send it away, or should they do something with it when they see it? Because I don't think they'll report it. It's just not what 20 and 21-year-olds would do.
Yeah. It's a difficult one whether you should engage with it, because it can have the effect of bringing it to the attention of more people. If there's a Facebook post and it has a lot of comments, even if those comments are people arguing, that will push it up into other people's feeds and make it look like it's high engagement content, which is why you see Facebook pages posting these things like name a fish without the letter E, because they want to get lots of comments so that the post and then their page gets promoted to more people. So it's not always helpful to engage with it in that space, for that reason, and also that the people who are influenced by it may not necessarily be influenced by a stranger on the internet presenting a counter narrative there, particularly if it's a page where there's a lot of sympathetic followers and they'll be giving little angry reacts or sad reacts or whatever to the comments. But I think definitely when it's a friend or family member, engaging with it there is important, because they may, in that case, you're somebody that they know and trust, and the page owner is more of a stranger on the internet. So I think in that circumstance, yes, but maybe not so much when it's just something that's come across their feed from a page.
No, that's great advice. Thank you. Awesome.
Thank you.
There's quite a few community groups who are trying to deal with how to respond to racist commentary on social media, and some of the principles also apply to how to deal with, say, talking to your racist uncle, and people actually run courses and share resources on this, and some of the key learnings are, in a way, supporting each other. So it's not just one person having to deal with it, but actually tagging in other friends, so that also being aware of the bystander effect, so that if you can just block and ignore people, or you can say, offer a questioning dialogue, and like, oh, that's not my experience, where did you get it? There's a whole sort of series of ways of responding to it, but it actually needs people to know where they're coming from first, so that if you're dealing with it in a sort of a class thing, having that discussions about, like, looking at what the messages are on media and then getting some understanding of it before just going in on it. And I'll drop into the chat a couple of the links to the resources that Action Station's Tautoko program has done, because it's got lots of things, including a really cool poster and stuff like that. So, like, there's a lot of work doing, but it's like, it's chipping away. But it's also that thing that if you're the person who is on the end of racist abuse or whatever, and you don't see anybody standing up for you, you feel really isolated. Whereas if other people come in and sort of say, hey, that's not cool, we don't want to be like that, it actually is that trying to take away the power from the trolls or the attackers, because you won't change them, but you can actually have an influence on the bystanders who aren't really involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and some of that work that Action Station's done has been really good. I think as part of that same project, they did some study on like comments on media sites like Stuff and the Herald and so forth, measuring the frequency of racist comments, and it was, I think, quite an eye opener to a lot of people, realizing how much of this discourse is happening in the comment section under mainstream media, and that actually I think probably contributed a little bit to the change that Stuff made on their comment policy.
I'll jump in again then. I was just, when you were talking about the official places like NetSafe, I just wondered what power do they actually have? Because I remember, I think yesterday you mentioned that one person, every time they had something taken down, they opened 2 more. Does it really have to escalate to that police level before something like, being banned, or that sort of action can be taken?
Yeah, well, NetSafe doesn't have themselves the power to make a platform take down content. They could probably only do that if it's something that's been classified as objectionable material, like if it was the Christchurch Shooters Manifesto. And in a case like that, Facebook probably would actually take it down automatically before there's reports to NetSafe. What they can do is make a report to the platform that'll be taken a bit more seriously than the report from an individual, because it's coming from that more institutional place. There is a term, I think, that Facebook uses for these type of reporters, because there's equivalents in other countries as well, and so they're more likely to get a response when it's NetSafe, but they don't necessarily have the power to take something down. And when something's escalated to the police, like I said, I'd called the 105 number about the post threatening to destroy mosque after mosque until I'm taken out. I'd also reported the post to Facebook, and Facebook in that case took it down and removed the page. But that individual then started 2 new pages. The police did speak to him for a couple of hours, but they don't really have the power to stop him from making Facebook pages either. I was surprised that they let him keep his firearms license after that. That's an area where they would have had a bit of power. But unless he's sharing objectionable material or making sort of credible threats to people, then they can't really do a lot there. I know that some of New Zealand's big misinformation spreaders were arrested at anti-lockdown protests, like Billy Tikahika and Vinnie Eastwood, and then more recently Brian Tamaki. And in some of their bail conditions, they weren't allowed to post on social media. But the crime in that case wasn't posting on social media; it was going to these protests in breach of the COVID restrictions. So just posting on social media in and of itself, the police can't do a lot about, though obviously they knew that this was a big part of them organising these protests. So when they were arrested for something else, that could be part of the bail conditions. So in those circumstances, police can do something.
Cool.
Okay. Just the question in the chat there, can I talk in more detail about engaging with people down the black hole of conspiracy theory? How do you do it, and what does empathy mean to you? Yeah, so I get asked a lot about talking to friends or relatives down that hole, which is why I wanted to include a bit of it about in the presentation in the workshop today. I think empathy really just means engaging with them in good faith, not like laughing about what they believe. When I do like my video essays, there is a bit of humor and I laugh at some of the ideas. But when I'm talking with someone one-on-one, I won't be telling them they're stupid or that it's ridiculous. I'll more try and show that I do care about them, and that's why I'm engaging with them. So I do have a small number of people in my life who have kind of gone down that rabbit hole. One of them I was speaking with recently, and whenever I talk to this person, I do so in private messaging rather than commenting on their Facebook post. So they'll make a Facebook post, and rather than commenting, "Oh, this is wrong," I'll send them a message saying, "Oh, I think that thing that you posted was wrong because I saw this other thing." And this person's quite hesitant about getting a COVID vaccine, so I messaged them and said, "Have you spoken to your GP about the vaccine?" Not trying to say that I'm a better authority on vaccines than the people she's listening to, but that maybe she should talk to somebody outside of the political sphere who just has that public health interest. And I also talked there about how in the United States, COVID deaths are higher in counties that voted for Trump compared to counties that voted for Biden, because a lot of Trump voters are not getting the vaccine. And so I showed this friend of mine that Donald Trump has been encouraging his followers to get the vaccine, and she responded that it's good that he's doing that. And I think I said something like, "Yeah, it's really, you really need to give Trump credit for that." And I mean, personally, I don't like giving saying positive things about Donald Trump, but because the person I'm engaging with is somebody who does have a positive view of Donald Trump, finding something like that where I can speak to them rather than just coming at it from this adversarial political perspective, I think was quite useful. So that's some of my own experience in engaging with people.
Yeah. Another one that I recently experienced on, I think it was LinkedIn, where we started with a really antagonistic position. But what made a breakthrough was more getting it back to the personal and sharing the personal experiences. And so recognizing that they were concerned for their relatives from what they had seen and observed, but that from my perspective, because my aunt had got polio and been paralyzed for the rest of her life as a teenager because she didn't get the vaccination, because it wasn't then, that was, like she could relate to my concern over my aunt and I could relate to hers over her friend who'd had a reaction. And we found a common ground to be able to talk him through. And once we'd got that calmer position, then I could drop in some of the information that Susie Wiles has shared in really accessible format about how the vaccines are developed, what goes into the science. But until we'd actually got to a not angry position to start with, we couldn't have a more gentle conversation. We had to sort of find something that we had in common, which was concern for other members of our family.
Yeah. And I think it can be a similar thing with even some of the hateful ideas that people are getting. If you can talk to them about their concerns about immigration, for example, and then show that people aren't taking their jobs or taking their housing, things like that. Some of these people may have, legitimate seeming concerns, but direct their anger at the wrong group of people, and they may feel that it's the fault of immigrants that they're low paid or that they're not finding a home. But if you can engage with them not about their racist attitudes but around those concerns, and then talk to them about that issue, that can be a way of engaging with people there.
Yeah, and there's a comment in the chat about Hindu supremacists and caste privilege, which in a way reminds me of that classic quote, to those who have privilege, equality looks like oppression. And so there are people for whom reaching equality will take away privilege that they feel comfortable and that they don't want to lose. And I'm sorry, but that is actually the way of the world, that change in the long run benefits people, a bit like the spirit level and how inequality makes everybody worse off because there's so much to be done. But some of that change isn't going to, it almost has to be forced onto people, like employers paying women equally with men. That is not something they will voluntarily do unless there is actually a really solid economic or legal argument for it. And sometimes it's just, well, I agree that you've got concerns, but the reality is whatever it is, and then moving on to the next step. how do we do this in a way that you can actually manage it?
Yeah, specifically when it's Hindu supremacists or those with caste privilege, it's a shame we don't have Mohan here at this workshop as well, because he'd probably have some more ideas around that. It's it's a culture that as a Pākehā New Zealander I'm not familiar enough with to really speak authoritatively on how to engage in those situations. But I think there's probably some areas where it overlaps with what we've been talking about. I'd be interested to hear some other perspectives on that from if anyone's got any thoughts on that specifically who's here today.
No, I'd only add, and I just read that quote in one of my students' assignments, so I was quite pleased as well. So yeah, so it's getting into my students, even though we had to spend half the semester on Zoom. Hey, Byron, I'm interested in the concept you introduced the other day about pre-bunking. Are we doing enough pre-bunking? I think we're doing enough at COVID, but all those other things, are we doing much in that space? Could we do more?
I think more could be done. Yeah, and this is in the white paper that Mohan and I are working on that will launch tomorrow. I'm going to talk a little bit about this. I mean, one thing that I think could be quite useful is to see some of these marginalized groups better resourced to produce counter narratives. So Tina Nata has written a bit about how Māori have really good reason to be distrustful of the state and of the media and even of the scientific establishment. And she's written about how within Māoridom there is this own there is a infrastructure that can respond to misinformation and disinformation and I guess do some of that pre-bunking work. But things like Māori television and iwi radio and wānanga are under-resourced. So part of challenging some of those narratives, whether that be the COVID misinformation, which is targeting Māori, or whether it's racism targeting Māori, the things we get from Hobson's Pledge and so forth, if that infrastructure for counter narratives was better resourced, and I think you can make a case for that in the Pacifica community as well. In an article I did for David Ferrier's Webworm, I spoke to Afiso Collins, who's a city councillor in South Auckland, and he talked about how a lot of the information that the Ministry of Health has put out has been in English, and it's been on Radio New Zealand and TV3, and it's not actually reaching a lot of the Pacifica community. So I think that there's space there to resource the people who can do those counter narratives and reach the people who aren't being reached by more sort of top down government narratives or large mainstream media narratives.
It's also interesting where people start to get ideas. Like most of us on this call would be familiar with the Human Rights Act and prohibited grounds of discrimination and principles there, and probably the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And we may also be familiar with the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act and what's in that. But over the course of the last few weeks, I've been watching a lot of oral submissions to Parliament on the Conversion Practices Prohibition Bill, which the Christian Network has developed a template for its conservative Christian followers to submit to Parliament. And the majority of them have been quoting things about freedom of expression under NZDT and about human rights. And this, I would say, is documents they've never come across before. And even if they're trying to use those ideas to back up their protection of their traditional parental rights, which are not actually in those documents, somebody has introduced an idea to them that others listening to them might say, well, what are those documents? What are those rights? What rights do we have? So however you get the ideas to people, being able to give that discussion about, did you know there is such a thing as a universal declaration of human rights, and what does it mean for you and your community? Those types of things, even coming from, different backgrounds, is quite a useful discussion.
So the comment there, online hate activities against the community who cannot report by themselves, for example, the Rohingya people in Myanmar. So I think that's a good example, because there's been a lot that's been said about Facebook's role in facilitating hate against the Rohingya people, and I think as with all this misinformation, stopping it at the source is the best method there. And yeah, if people who are being targeted by that hate can't report it themselves, I mean, that's something that that others could do. I think in that case, it'd probably be difficult for those of us in Aotearoa, because a lot of that content's likely to be in a different language that we don't speak. I think there's also a role for journalists and human rights organisations to be doing those counter narratives there when there is a hateful ideology being perpetrated in somewhere like Myanmar or another country there. And part of that role for those groups, journalists and human rights groups, that would be holding to account the mostly American social media platforms that are allowing this, and that are not doing something about it there. Anyone else have any thoughts on that to share?
I don't so much have any thoughts on that specifically, but one thing I wanted to ask you, Byron, is, and hopefully this isn't sort of too nosy, but how much of your day do you spend doing this sort of mahi reporting and going through content and those things? If I can ask.
Yeah, it varies a bit. We're just going through content and reporting. Sometimes I'll just do it if I've got a quiet moment, like if I'm on a bus or something. I'll be scrolling through, so I don't really think of it as committing a lot of time to it. When I'm doing research for the videos I do or articles, then I'll spend a bit more time to it. I might go and spend half the day in the library on my laptop, pulling things together and doing some research there.
Just one little thing that I dropped in a suggestion about finding allies, because there are both organisations and individuals who've got links to different parts. So the Council of Trade Unions Te Kawaikamahi has for many years been supporting a charitable trust, Union Aid, which has run projects with refugees from Burma, Myanmar, based in Thailand, but having links back to that country. And so they've got a network of people who have got information and sort of languages, and there's lots of others. That's the thing, is that within Aotearoa New Zealand there are so many networks and so many people with great connections, but it sometimes takes that. I mean, if I need to know something, sometimes I just yell out on Twitter and ask, can anyone put me in touch with somebody? And by word of mouth, there is that 2 degrees of separation. Often I can find somebody to give me either the information or the who would be a good person to talk with about this thing. It doesn't always change decision making, but it can help get better informed and who needs to be involved in a conversation, those types of things. And I think Inclusive Aotearoa Collective, which is led by Injun Raman, they're also trying to build up networks of people who can be supporting this type of thing. Now, their focus is more within Aotearoa, but again, if you need to know, you keep on asking until you find the right person.
Yeah, I think what's quite valuable is having those networks where you can draw on if somebody has a particular skill or particular expertise, whether that might be, speaking the language where some of this is happening, or being more familiar with the cultural context, being able to share skills in that regard, and share the work around so that people are playing to their strengths is quite good.
I find it interesting then, Byron, is there no proactive sort of, all those government agencies and the NetSafes of this world, they all react when something's, have we got nothing, and it's sort of Catherine's question sparked it. So you're out there doing a lot of work to try and sort of, see what's going on. Is that the sort of the first line of defense we have at the moment? There isn't because I'm just thinking, I don't know what's in your white paper, but an investment in an organization that actually was proactive, it sounds to me that would be a sensible thing to have running.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we have now is reactive rather than proactive, and that I think reflects a lot of the institutions we have not really having caught up with the social media era. Like I talk about doing the ASA complaint, and then once they'd ruled on the complaint, the advertisement had already stopped running because it was just a 1 week long sponsored Facebook post. So even when you have an organisation that can react, they often react quite slowly. Or in the case of the Broadcasting Standards Authority complaint that I've got going on at the moment, that's a complaint about an episode of the show that aired in June, and it's taken this long because the broadcaster has 20 working days to respond, and then BSA has another 20 working days to deliberate, and there's a bit of back and forth there. Whereas that episode, it didn't just air on television; it was uploaded to Facebook and gets shared around. And when the complaint, regardless of what the ruling is, a lot of damage would have already been done by this, and that pre-bunking that we've been talking about. There's not a lot. Not a lot of that happening. There's a little bit of it happening in some media, but a lot of media responses are still quite reactive. Like there was a News Hub article debunking all the claims in the Voices for Freedom pamphlet, which is useful if you're the kind of person who will listen to the scientists debunking the claims. But if you're someone who the first time you encountered that misinformation was getting the pamphlet, you're probably not going to go out looking for a debunking. It would be better if people had the correct information first and were aware of the misinformation that's being spread, but knew that it was misinformation. So yeah,
and it's interesting.
What could be done.
It's interesting with those pamphlets that were appearing as paper forms, that the government said, if you receive them, please report it to CERT, which is the Computer Emergency Response Task Force, that actually deals with online cybersecurity threats and the rest. So this is one of the things, that there is a jigsaw puzzle of government agency responses, that there is a team led by Department of Internal Affairs and with tag-in from justice and enforcement agencies like police, looking at what the regulatory regime is like, whether it's adequate, and is looking for a review to do legislation changes. And this is like following on from the Christchurch call in response to the videos of the attacks that was shared, and that is partly outward looking of what could they get Facebook and other big giants to agree to, but like, it's actually quite complex, and personally I'm not sure that there is enough community input into it, but they are having those discussions. The thing is, of course, it takes so long to catch up with the reality we're living in now. So that my thing of trying to support people who are attacked, trying to sort of influence bystanders to be more sympathetic, those are sort of steps that individuals can take. But trying to get action across groups will require a lot of group activity. So I'm not sure whether the Department of Internal Affairs have gone live with their consultation exercise, or whether they're just doing agency discussions to get it to that white paper stage. But, it's happening.
So the comment from Laura there: hard when people start dismissing government, universities, mainstream media, big pharma, mainstream health providers. Seems like there's nothing much less. They only listen to fringe voices. Almost like the more they deplatform, the more validity they gain in the eyes of conspiracy theorists. So hard. Yeah, and that's definitely a thing. Once a person gets that far down the rabbit hole that they're not going to trust any mainstream source, they may see the deplatforming as being validation of what these people are saying. It must be true because they're being censored, which is why I think it's important to have that information, have that misinformation deplatformed before it reaches a wide audience, because what I've seen when some of these people have been deplatformed and they move from YouTube or Facebook to Telegram, some of their audience follows them, but they get a much smaller reach. So it makes an impact on the spread of that misinformation, but it's not completely stopping it, because there are some people who have already become really committed, and then getting those people out of that space, I think, is more the one-on-one empathetic conversations that we've talked about, which is it is more difficult and takes a lot more work than deplatforming. But the deplatforming on its own can only be one part of that process.
It also kind of says too, that comment's really interesting, that potentially having one, like a government type agency debunking is probably going to be not effective, because that's part of exactly what you're saying, the voices that you're not. So a bit like we talk about reaching out to the COVID communities by using the people that are in those communities. Maybe that the sort of distributive model where, you know, people who trust other people have those pre-bunking. So that would, but it's very hard to implement. But yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
People like yourself, Byron, who don't look like you. If you were in a suit and tie, you know, I can see that, you know, it's just a different look, a different feel. Then, you know, if I put you in front of my students, they would empathize immediately and go, yes, you know, we get this. So yeah, it was an interesting comment.
Yeah, I think some of those people spreading misinformation and hate haven't really known how to react to some of what I'm doing, because I'm not part of the mainstream media, although I did have an article published in Newsroom recently, so maybe now they'll decide that I am part of the mainstream media or whatever. But they I hope that some of what I'm doing perhaps reaches people who maybe are a little bit critical of the mainstream media or of the state. I guess there's other people as well that might be, if they were resourced to be doing that pre-bunking stuff, could potentially reach an audience that's not being reached by those more mainstream sources.
Yeah, I think that could be. That sounds like yeah, exactly. That's I mean, a lot of it does come down to resourcing and time. I mean, it takes time, and if there's a lot of people on one side promoting a lot of stuff, then, you know, you've got to have something that's going to be equivalent on the other side. Otherwise, you know, it does feel like there's a tidal wave of that stuff coming in, and there's the odd person on the beach trying to stop it, but it's just going to wash past us unless we, you know, would do things, you know, seriously. So
there's a quote from Jonathan Swift that I used in a video essay, and I think I've quoted it in the white paper here as well. Here we go. Falsehood flies and truth comes limping after it, so that when men come to be undeceived, it's too late. The jest is over and the tale has had its effect. So this idea that misinformation spreads very quickly, and trying to debunk it or provide that counter narrative afterwards is a much slower process, and the damage has been done there, which comes back to the whole pre-bunking idea there.
I've put into the chat an extract from an event that's already happened, but it's interesting for the context of Department of Internal Affairs starting to hold hui with different groups, talking about their review of how to regulate online content harm and also looking at other forms of harm. So the intention is to be talking with different groups, but at the moment most people wouldn't have heard of it, because obviously 5 million people within Aotearoa New Zealand, all of whom will have an opinion. So it's that thing of like, what are the key ideas that need to be done before drafting up some kind of, and it links up with the hate speech work and all the rest of it. So I think it's really important we keep raising these things, but I don't think it's that the government is not aware. It's just, I think there are different parts of it who either throw their hands up, it's too hard, or if they're not personally impacted, don't see it as the same urgency as somebody who is facing really negative stuff on a day-to-day basis, some of which turns into violence and which actually denies them the same sort of chance of human rights within Aotearoa as other people might have. But yeah, so I think, it's great to amplify it, but always it was right to know that, yes, somebody is looking at it.
Well, I guess we've been in this workshop for a couple of hours now. Maybe we'll finish up pretty soon. But is there anything else people want to contribute before we do that?
I would like to say something on Rohingya people. Mm-hmm. They are the largest stateless community of the world. But I think for their statelessness or their refugee status, I think online hate plays a pivotal role. Because when a state is patronizing the hate against the community, for example, the Rohingya community, then I think it is very difficult to control the online hate activities. I would like to share an example. Oshin Firuta is called by the international media once by the Time magazine, dubbed him as the Buddhist Osama bin Laden. But he was jailed last year, but the army government who took power Myanmar in February, Oshin Firuta is released by the Myanmar authority. So I think it's very difficult when a state is patronizing the hate against the ethnic community, and Rohingya refugees are the best example of them, I think.
Yeah, definitely a lot harder to counter that hate when it's coming from a state that has that power and that authority.
Yeah.
I have a journalist who comes and speaks to my class who actually went to Myanmar and he was under a tourist visa, but he went out on the back of a motorbike and talking to find out the real story. But of course, he did that once. He was then banned from entering the country. And, and you can see, and one of the points he made to me the last time we had him was that COVID has been a bit of an opportunity for lots of governments because the attention is focused now so much onto something else that a lot of stuff can happen, and that international media watch is lessening because of the problems happening in so many countries across the world, which it's just a really interesting point. So yeah, it makes it even harder for countries like New Zealand to have that impact on the world stage.
Yeah.
Catherine said that the link I shared before didn't open, which is probably true. I mean, it's a past event and you have to be able to do a backtrack from it. But there's a more general page on the Department of Internal Affairs on their countering violent extremism online work. And that's not exactly the same, but is linked to this review they're doing about the whole regulatory framework. But if you start it as that, going to that countering violent extremism page and have a look through to see where they're at, then you'll be able to do the okay, sign up, ask for more information, keep an eye out for opportunities to be involved. I'm partly involved through a couple of other groups I'm a member of, but anybody can, but it's just you have to know something exists to be able to say, hey, add me in too.
Right. All right. Well, I guess we'll wrap up. If you didn't see the public talk yesterday or the interview that Mohan did with me earlier in the week, I think those are still up on YouTube and Facebook. They can be watched, and there'll be the launch of the white paper tomorrow. So I think there might be something happening for that. So keep an eye on the event, and we'll carry on. But thank you everyone for giving a couple of hours of your morning to come along to this. I think it's been really productive and some good discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Byron.
Thank you.
Thanks, Byron.
Bye, everyone.